Her body lay face down in red Georgia clay, fingers curled as if clawing one last breath. But it was the single, perfect shoeprint beside her skull that froze investigators in place. Size 11, deep tread, pressed into drying blood, untouched by rain or wildlife, almost like the killer wanted it found. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe and like the channel. By the morning of September 3, 1988, Atlanta's humid dawn had already begun pulling scent from the earth, and with it, the sharp metallic odor of blood around the perimeter of Chattahoochee River National Recreation Area. Joggers had first mistaken the body for a mannequin dumped during the night, until the reality, 22-year-old college junior Emily Carson, forced them backward in shock. Her identification came quickly, not because her face was intact, but because of her denim jacket embroidered with her university's name, Mercer College, and the crushed leather backpack discarded beside a patch of pine. The responding officers noted several unusual consistencies. No sign of sexual assault, no robbery, no frantic struggle pattern in the dirt. Just one clear footprint, positioned inches from the base of Emily's head, as if the killer had stood perfectly still, observing her final seconds. That footprint, later determined to be from a men's hiking boot sold only in limited sporting outlets in Georgia in the mid-1980s, would become the central obsession of the investigation. But in those early days, detectives didn't know whether it was arrogance or desperation that compelled the killer to leave his mark so boldly. Emily had vanished 2 nights earlier after finishing her cashier shift at a downtown record store. She was scheduled to meet her roommate for late-night fast food near North Avenue but never arrived. Her car, a navy Ford Pinto with rust along the passenger door, remained parked exactly where she had left it near the store's back lot, the keys still in her purse. The gas gauge low but not empty, all perfectly undisturbed. Atlanta police turned immediately to the idea of a targeted killing rather than a random abduction. Emily was known for her strict routines, making her an easy subject to track. She kept night shifts at the store every Thursday and Saturday, walked to the same parking lot, and drove home along a predictable route. She called her parents every Sunday morning without fail. She was not a nightlife regular, not involved in drugs, not romantically entangled in anything complicated. In the language of homicide investigators, she represented clean data, a life free of the murky intersections that often mudded motives. The autopsy report would further confound that certainty. The medical examiner listed cause of death as blunt force trauma delivered with a compact, heavy object. The strike had been precise, aimed at the temporal bone, not wild or impulsive. No additional fractures, no hesitation injuries. She had been killed outdoors, not moved post-mortem. Soil particles embedded beneath her fingernails matched those from the trail. Time of death estimated between 1:00 a.m. and 4:00 a.m., aligning with the hours she would have been walking to her car after closing. What unsettled investigators was her shoes. Emily, the victim of a murder seemingly delivered in the woods, was barefoot. No shoes near the body, no shoe fragments along the clearing, no drag marks. Her feet were clean, the soles uncut, unstained. She had not walked into that forest barefoot. Someone had removed her footwear either before or after death and taken them with him. It linked back to the print beside her. A killer obsessed with shoes, perhaps in collection or symbolism, or possibly something forensic, a calculated erasure of transfer evidence. Television coverage erupted within days. Atlanta in the late 80s was a city still shadowed by the memory of its earlier child murders and racial tensions. Every unsolved death risked renewing public panic. Emily's case, a young white college student killed with surgical brutality, reignited the press corps. Her parents appeared on local broadcasts, their grief tightly held, their language soft but cracked. Her mother mentioned Emily's love of hiking, her carefulness, her willingness to help classmates, but nothing resembling a connection to anyone capable of such violence. Within a week, police assembled a timeline. Witnesses from the record store confirmed she closed alone at midnight. A coworker had offered her a ride, but she declined, saying she needed the solitude before finals. A security guard from a nearby bank reported seeing a tall man in a green windbreaker watching Emily cross the lot around 12:15 a.m., but could not recall facial features. Another witness, a homeless teen sheltering near the interstate overpass, heard a car door slam and raised voices shortly after 1:00 a.m. Yet his recollection shifted each time detectives interviewed him, slipping under the weight of media attention and threats from unseen corners of the community. The trail to the river where she was found was 6 miles from her car. No evidence suggested she drove there. She would not have walked in the dark, especially not alone. The image became clear. Someone intercepted her after she left the record store, transported her silently, struck her once, and walked away leaving only a print. Homicide units circulated composite sketches of the shoe sole to every sporting and surplus store in metropolitan Atlanta. But only one employee recalled selling that exact model, an REI clerk who remembered a man in his 40s purchasing size 11s in early August. The shoes were sturdy, meant for Appalachian trail hiking. The buyer paid in cash, wore aviator sunglasses indoors, and left quickly without conversation. The store's security tapes recorded over themselves every 24 hours. No footage survived. In parallel, detectives interviewed Emily's professors and classmates. Nothing pointed to obsessions, stalkers, or threats. Just a disciplined student who preferred library silence over campus parties. The problem in Atlanta, 1988, was the volume of violent crime. Leads drowned in competing crises. Forensics, though evolving, could not yet deliver DNA precision at the scale of future decades. The footprint cast blurred slightly as plaster dried. The soil beneath had been too damp to hold minute tread patterns. Still, that single symbol of the killer's presence became the spine of the case. Laboratory technicians scoured the backpack Emily carried. Inside, notebooks dense with engineering equations, receipts from the record store, one lipstick, and a movie stub dated 2 weeks earlier. No fingerprints except hers. The jacket she wore showed a faint fiber catch near the collar, blue acrylic from an unknown textile, not from any garment she owned. Detectives hypothesized an abductor with experience. Not a spree killer, not impulsive, but someone who had either hunted before or prepared meticulously. Emily's killing did not resemble sexual sadism or rage. It reflected stability, execution. It resembled a hunt completed cleanly. Public pressure escalated when a second woman disappeared in mid-October, 21-year-old waitress Melanie Hurst, last seen entering her car after a midnight shift outside Buckhead. Her vehicle turned up abandoned 2 days later near a bus depot, and though her body was never located, a single shoe print near the driver's side door matched the tread from the Carson case. Same depth, same brand, same size. Atlanta detectives concluded the worst possible truth, that Emily's murder had not been an isolated act but the opening chapter of a pattern still unfolding. The city, still wounded from past unsolved tragedies, held its breath. By winter, rain erased outdoor evidence, leaves collapsed into the riverbanks and tips slowed. Emily's parents returned to their hometown in Tennessee, leaving a small cross near the trail's entrance. Investigators boxed her file, but not without a final note. The killer had left the print on purpose. It was not a mistake. It was signature. It was possession. It was confidence. The shoeprint was the beginning, not the ending. Winter in Atlanta passed without a single lead that held weight. The shoeprint became both a haunting emblem and a suffocating limitation. Detectives could not solve a murder by tread comparisons alone, yet every angle, vehicle access, victimology, behavioral profiling, kept returning to that solitary mark beside Emily Carson's head. It was the only voice her killer had left behind, precise, intentional, unshaken by the chaos of discovery. The impression remained a reminder that while Emily's life ended in silence, her killer operated with ritual-level certainty. By 1989, the task force formed for the case was quietly dissolved. The second missing woman, Melanie Hurst, was declared presumed deceased. Though without remains, her family clung to a narrowing window of denial. Her parents insisted she might have fled, but the shoeprint told investigators otherwise. It followed them like a shadow through round-table briefings, press updates, and hallway whispers. Detectives who had walked the riverbank in Emily's case reported dreams of standing in that same dirt, staring down the exact tread pattern, as if the killer had left a footprint in their lives as well. The case file thickened with interview transcripts and aerial maps of the woods, but the evidence inside never evolved. The missing shoes, the clean crime scene, the lack of defensive wounds, they all pointed toward a perpetrator who was either known to victims or capable of gaining immediate compliance without panic, without sound. Emily's autopsy suggested she never had time to resist, that the first strike had interrupted thought itself. No torture, no prolonged violence, just one expertly delivered blow. The FBI joined briefly in early 1990. A behavioral analyst from Quantico reviewed both cases and concluded the offender was most likely in his late 30s to mid-40s, physically strong, familiar with outdoor terrain and disposal sites, and above all, disciplined. He did not kill for chaos. He killed for structure, routine, ritual, and possibly reinforcement. The missing shoes might have represented trophy-taking behavior, but the analyst believed something more precise. The killer may have replaced the victim's shoes with his own footprint, symbolically occupying the space where they once stood. His shoeprint was not merely presence. It was overriding. The analyst's notes suggested a chilling psychological angle. He wanted to be the last person to stand where they stood, not emotionally but territorially. Every murder scene became his controlled landscape. Every footprint a signature claiming the moment of death. In 1991, 3 years after Emily's body was found, Atlanta PD received an anonymous call. The male voice, strained but steady, claimed knowledge about the shoeprint, stating simply, "He leaves it because he needs it." The line clicked dead before tracing. The number belonged to a pay phone outside a grocery store, and no witnesses recalled seeing anyone lingering near it. The call contributed nothing externally but ignited internal discussion. The phrasing, "needs it," suggested psychological compulsion rather than arrogance. Perhaps the killer did not want to be caught at all. He only needed to affirm to himself that he existed in the moment of termination. The years following turned the case into a regional ghost story. College students reused the trail cautiously. Hikers exchanged warnings that were less procedural than instinctive. Parents reminded daughters to avoid walking alone after dark. Time moved, but the footprint remained suspended in investigative memory. In 1994, a third potential victim emerged. 23-year-old dental assistant Carla Boyer, found near abandoned train tracks outside Marietta. She too had vanished after a late shift. She too displayed a single blunt trauma wound. But unlike Emily, her shoes were present, aligned neatly beside her body. And 10 feet away in a patch of softened earth lay the same shoeprint. Same size, same model, same unbroken tread. But this time, the print faced away from the body, as if the killer had stood not over her but in departure, watching his own exit. Carla's case reawakened media frenzy. Reporters drew immediate parallels. Parents of Emily and Melanie were interviewed again, their faces older, grief calcified. Melanie's family had never received remains, but now the pattern felt undeniable. The killer had returned after a 6-year dormancy, or perhaps he had never stopped, only changed hunting grounds beyond visible jurisdiction. The shoe manufacturer had long discontinued the boot model. What had once been sold in a few Atlanta sports stores had now become vintage, rare. Forensic analysts believed the killer had maintained the shoes meticulously, either for ritual preservation or because replacing them would break whatever internal code he followed. He was still wearing the same pair, or at least the same model, nearly a decade later. Carla's autopsy revealed additional anomalies. A trace of pine resin was found near her hairline, not native to the train site. Soil samples showed particulate from hiking soil, not rail bed earth. Detectives believed she had been killed elsewhere and transported, which signified escalation in logistical planning. He no longer struck near where he abducted. He managed time, distance, and staging. A behavioral memo circulated quietly. The killer might be aging, growing slower, compensating by planning more. He would not stop voluntarily. Georgia Bureau of Investigation reopened all 3 cases under a joint task force. The name, sole signature killer, emerged in classified briefings, never reaching public phrasing. The footprint was no longer just symbolic. It was operational. He used it like a ledger entry, marking each victim with exacting uniformity while altering surrounding rituals to avoid pattern detection. The question that tormented detectives was simple. How had he selected 3 women so different yet so similar in vulnerability? Emily, a disciplined student; Melanie, a city waitress; Carla, a commuter professional. Their only shared traits, youth, nighttime schedules, solitary movement, were too broad to classify as targeted criteria. He hunted availability, not personality. In 1997, a final potential link surfaced. Construction near the Chattahoochee uncovered a shallow burial pit, long collapsed by sediment and root systems. Inside were fragments, a rusted zipper, a single lace eyelet belonging to a woman's sneaker, bone shards too eroded for identification. The remains could not be conclusively tied to the killer, but the proximity to Emily's original discovery site forced investigators to confront a troubling possibility. They had only uncovered the victims he allowed them to find. This theory altered investigative tone. Previously, he was believed to act rarely and precisely. Now, analysts considered the inverse. He might kill regularly, depositing only select bodies to sustain his internal ritual. The footprint became less calling card and more communication, a controlled leak of presence. Technological advances in DNA during the early 2000s offered renewed hope. Evidence from Emily's jacket and Carla's clothing was retested with improved sensitivity. But the killer's discipline emerged again. No skin cells, no sweat, no stray hair. The single fiber found on Emily's collar remained unmatched in all national databases. It was synthetic, commercially generic, unrevealing. Cold case detectives reconstructed every possible route Emily could have taken. They traced Melanie's final steps through Buckhead with traffic analysis. They interviewed Carla's coworkers to determine if anyone had followed her, waited, or watched. The killer dissolved into crowds, into parking lots, into midnight alleys the way water vanishes into soil. By 2010, surviving detectives carried the case like weight. Many had retired. Some had died. but a small cluster still visited Emily's site on anniversaries, sometimes placing a rose, sometimes nothing. They stood quietly, imagining the killer's stance, boot tread firm in mud, observing the stillness he had created. The shoeprint stood as monument, not of ego, not of triumph, but of continuation. He had not left a fingerprint, a message, or a mistake. He left only his step, frozen in time, pressed into blood-soaked clay. What occurred next, decades after the murder of a college student in Georgia Clay, would forever alter the trajectory of the investigation. In 2018, 30 years after the morning when Emily Carson's body was found at the river's edge, a breakthrough arrived not through eyewitness testimony or confessions, but through the relentless progression of forensic science. A newly implemented microparticle analysis unit at the Georgia Bureau reopened archived trace samples from multiple cold cases, including Emily's. What had been, in 1988, a meaningless blue fiber stuck to her jacket collar, now became the most significant development since the footprint itself. The fiber matched not to a garment, but to a discontinued interior car upholstery manufactured only for one model year. 1986 Nissan Pathfinder, light blue interior, variant code only shipped to dealerships in Georgia and Tennessee. The car became the first concrete anchor in a case untethered for decades. A list of all registered owners of that specific trim line was compiled, though most vehicles were scrapped or untraceable. But among the names was one that quietly unnerved investigators. A former Army survival instructor named Alan Riker, discharged for psychological instability in 1985, who had resided in Atlanta until late 1989 before relocating north. He had purchased the Pathfinder cash, second-hand, only a month before Emily's murder. His history, once sealed, came into view: extensive wilderness training, documented fixations with order, an obsession with tracking and erosion patterns, and a disciplinary note citing ritualistic behavioral tendencies. By the time investigators reached him in 2019, he had died 2 years earlier in rural Pennsylvania, living alone in a cabin with no known family, no employment, and no digital presence. The cabin's documents revealed no diaries, no trophies, no photographs. But one item was cataloged: a pair of boots, size 11, the exact discontinued tread pattern tied to all 3 crime scenes. The boots showed wear inconsistent with everyday use, soles preserved, stored, cleaned. Investigators concluded he wore them only for the events that mattered to him. Every murder scene was conducted in those boots alone. Even more chilling, the shoes were fitted with replacement soles manufactured in 1993, meaning he had repaired them meticulously, ensuring the tread remained unchanged across time. His ritual extended beyond the act. It saturated the tools. The discovery did not close the file. It did not end the mystery. DNA could not be verified because what he left behind was absence. No hair, no prints, no organic trace. The boots, interiors had been sterilized repeatedly, likely with bleach solution, the insoles replaced. The fiber from Emily's jacket remained the only transferable residue that escaped his process. Investigators returned to analytical theory. The footprint was not arrogance but compulsion. The boots were not worn because he lacked alternatives, but because they were the instrument of confirmation. To stand at the moment of death was his final act of authorship. His presence was a single footprint imprinting itself into the memory of soil. Media outlets seized upon the narrative. Documentaries resurfaced images of Emily's burial markers, the riverbank trail, the excavated fragments near the Chattahoochee. Families appeared again on camera, their sentences heavy with the fatigue of decades. Melanie's parents had grown elderly, still without remains. Carla's younger brother spoke for the first time publicly, describing a life carried out beneath an unnamed shadow. They embraced closure without resolution, acceptance without full truth. The killer had died without answering, but the shoeprint remained, still in some way his final voice. In late 2020, forensic archivists requested excavation rights around the original trail near the river. This time, equipped with LiDAR scanning, they detected subterranean anomalies, soil compression irregularities marking at least 3 burial disturbances predating Emily's discovery by years. The locations suggested earlier victims, long disintegrated, long absorbed into the terrain. The killer may have started long before the first body was found. Emily was not the beginning. She was simply the first whose ending he allowed the world to witness. Forensic anthropologists sifted the ground. Tiny bone fragments, dental enamel, hair microfilaments, and textile scraps were retrieved, though identification would require years and still might yield nothing. But the evidence changed the narrative. This was not a series of isolated attacks. It was a hidden archive of violence. The killer had engineered disappearance as carefully as he engineered presence. Some victims he let vanish completely. Others he presented deliberately with the shoeprint as seal. Why Emily? Why Melanie? Why Carla? Investigators theorized he required calibration, a reaffirmation of self through the evidence he placed and withheld. In Emily's case, he left the print boldly, inches from her head. In Carla's case, he left it in retreat, facing away. Each placement was a message written not for police but for himself. Not confession, not signature, but ceremony. In 2022, a psychological review board reclassified the case into a rare typology, a killer defined not by fixation on victims but by fixation on moment. The kill was not climax, it was punctuation. The footprint was not flourish, it was necessity. His motivation was not death but the stillness death provided. A landscape held motionless, a body silenced, a footprint unsmudged. Looking through the archived scene photos, one detail struck a retired detective. In all 3 discovered cases, the footprint lay on ground undisturbed by natural degradation at time of discovery. Even rainfall patterns had not destroyed imprint precision. It suggested he waited for the exact hour when soil moisture, temperature, and compression would hold his mark. He did not just kill, he engineered terrain. Though Riker remained the strongest suspect, the case officially lists him not as confirmed killer but primary entity of interest. Because the evidence, though overwhelming, is indirect. Because he never confessed. Because scientific certainty demands more than inference, even when inference is razor-edged. And because the possibility remains, however faint, that someone else created the footprint, someone more shadowed, more meticulous, someone who continued long after Riker's death. Cold case investigators still gather annually. Some bring files, others only memory. They walk the path where Emily once fell, where police once knelt in red clay, where the print once stood without tremor. They pause at the point of discovery, silent, imagining him there in the darkness, measuring the ground, adjusting his weight, ensuring the imprint would last. Emily's name is etched on memorial plaques in both Georgia and Tennessee. Melanie's family still holds out hope for identified remains, though time has eroded possibility. Carla's grave bears fresh flowers each spring, and along the Chattahoochee forest root systems curl around disturbed earth that investigators believe hides more victims, unfound, unnamed, inaccessible beneath decades of sediment. The case remains open, not because the killer breathes, but because his story does. The shoeprint, cast in plaster and stored in climate-controlled archives, is still consulted by trainees, behavioral analysts, and forensic students. It is studied not as evidence alone, but as artifact, a message from someone who viewed murder as landscape, ritual, and territory. Atlanta has expanded, highways widened, suburbs extended. The riverbanks run quieter now, fewer joggers, fewer late-night wanderers. But even in softened earth, investigators swear the ground remembers. The trail, when walked in late summer, still holds heat where Emily fell. And though the killer's boots will never step there again, the imprint he left, clean, symmetrical, unshaken, remains suspended in investigative memory. Some crimes end with trial, sentencing, closure. This one ends with a single print, pressed into drying clay in 1988, refusing decay. A footprint not of ego or accident, but of compulsion so exact it transcended death. The killer is gone, his boots archived, his cabin emptied. Yet his final step remains, and in that step, every unanswered question lies waiting, held permanently in Georgia soil.